Hello again, YouTubers, on with SpongeBob 101 back here again on the SpongeBob channel. Today we are reviewing Kamp Koral SpongeBob's Underyears Season 1 Episode 2. Today we have actually two segments. So the first one is Sugar Squeeze and the second is Tag You're It. So for each episode I'll be giving you guys a summary of the plot and then giving you guys my thoughts about it, and of course you guys can put your own opinions about these two segments in the comments below. Alright, so here we are on the Apple TV page again. I just decided to show this because it has a summary. So it says here, the campers meet two backwoods narwhals named Narlene and Nobby, who treat them to a sweet surprise. So that one is for Sugar Squeeze. And then the second one, on a rainy day, SpongeBob and his friends entertain themselves indoors with a turbulent game of tag. So without further ado, we're just going to start off with Sugar Squeeze and then move on from there. So time to head over to the screenshots. Right, so let's start off with episode 2A, Sugar Squeeze here. We start off in the cabin, in the dingy cabin, by the way. That's the name of the cabin that SpongeBob, Patrick, Sandy, and Squidward are staying in. So Patrick finds that his candy is missing, and SpongeBob finds out that his candy is missing as well. It turns out they're not the only ones who have candy missing, but Sandy actually spots a trail of wrappers on the ground, so they decide to follow it and eventually set up bait for the candy thief. And who else better to be the bait than SpongeBob, right? So they dress him up in a candy wrapper, which is pretty funny. Patrick promises that they will stay up all night if they have to, but obviously, nope, they just fell asleep. Sometime later, this mystery character comes up and tries to rip the wrapper off SpongeBob, and SpongeBob screams for help essentially, and eventually the gang confronts this new character, or thief, or whatever you want to call it, this little boy essentially. But that is cut short as well because all of them get kidnapped, in a way. We see this title card not much later, and then they find themselves in this cabin with that boy playing with boats. So yeah, Patrick is pretty unhappy, but before they can even lay a single hand on the boy, a foot or a new character shows up and introduces herself as Narlene. Narlene. And the little boy that showed up earlier is known as Nobby. So both of them are siblings, just random inhabitants of the surrounding area around the camp. And SpongeBob and Patrick are pretty excited, but Sandy isn't, because she still thinks that they are candy thieves. But eventually, Narlene explains that the candy is being used to produce Sugar Squeeze, which is a concoction that's made out of, candy, right? So the gang watches as the Sugar Squeeze is produced, and then finally, this yellow concoction comes out of the machine, and Narlene gives it to Patrick, SpongeBob, Sandy, and the rest of the campers, who are really excited about it because Sugar Squeeze probably tastes really good. So they warm up to each other, and this is random part where Narlene introduces everyone to her kinfolk. I'm not sure what that I mean, just random folks holding a banjo. I have no idea what the middle thing is, but obviously the one on the bottom is a guitar. And with another dose of Sugar Squeeze, everyone goes like totally hyper. Yeah. So they start glowing, which is pretty hilarious because Narlene gives them a ride back to Kamp Koral and uses SpongeBob and Patrick as like those blinker lights to, when turning left and turning right. It was really hilarious. And then, of course, they return to Kamp Koral, where SpongeBob decides to share his Sugar Squeeze with the rest of the campers. Now, although this is a very noble thing to do, it causes quite a bit of havoc, right? So Mr. Krabs, trying to go to sleep, ends up with a whole bunch of kids just hopping around and just being super hyper, I guess. So yeah, and this causes quite a bit of problems. So Mr. Krabs tries to get them back into their cabins, but to no avail, right? They're still like rampaging all around. And so Mr. Krabs is pretty exasperated. And that is when Narlene with a mustache shows up and offers a solution to Mr. Krabs known as Thunder Squeeze. Now this thing is literally like a giant You know those things in the in bingo where you put all the bingo balls in and then you like rotate it to see which ball comes out. So yeah, this is essentially like that, like a hamster ball of some sort. And yeah, again, we have an English accent where Nobby is used as a demonstrator for how the thunder squeeze should work. All the kids are actually pretty convinced and want to try it out. So Mr. Krabs offers to pay Narlene to use it. But when Narlene says that she doesn't accept legal tender, Mr. Krabs is like, what? You don't want money? So, yeah. Eventually, after a barter trade, they do make a deal. And then Mr. Krabs gets on with, using that contraption to drain all that sugar squeeze from the kids. So the episode generally ends off with, everyone falling asleep, and Narlene and Nobby are just heading out of Kamp Koral on their wagon. Narlene gulps down a little bit of that remainder sugar squeeze and shoots it into the sky, creating fireworks. So that awakens SpongeBob and Patrick for a bit, where they see themselves and Sandy as well in terms of fireworks. So I think that was a pretty nice ending to the episode, and yeah, pretty interesting adventure. Overall, I'll give this one a 7 out of 10. It's not really a bad episode. It's just that compared to the next one, I think the next one is actually better. Yeah, I generally don't have much thought about this episode. Yeah, I guess if I had to nitpick, I didn't really like the introduction of the new characters, Nobby and Narlene. And also, to give some context, I've watched all the Kamp Koral episodes that have been put out so far. So Narlene and Nobby are recurring characters. And so for some reason, it seems like Narlene is... I'm not sure if Narlene has like good intentions or is like secretly malicious, right? Because in this episode, she seems pretty nice and like offers all the campers sugar squeeze. But then she turns around and, sells that solution to the problem to Mr. Krabs. So not sure if they're just out there to fool around with people or are they really genuine. Well, we'll talk more about Nobby and Narlene in future episode reviews because they are in future episodes. So yeah, comment box below, what do you think of Sugar Squeeze? But without further ado, let's move on. Tag You're It. Episode 2B is one I think the better one out of the two. This episode starts off with SpongeBob, Patrick, and Sandy in a dingy cabin doing their stretches in preparation for a game of tag. So they're all ready to go. Squirt kind of signals that he does want to join them, but they don't actually offer for him to join them. So anyways, they head out, but unfortunately it starts raining. So Squidward just tells them to play inside quietly. But of course, it's not possible to play tag quietly, right? And while the characters are playing tag, Squidward is in his quarters painting a painting of himself, and so on. But unfortunately, the ruckus causes his fold-up bed to slam right down on him, causing him substantial injury here, which is reflected on the painting of all things. So poor Squidward. This is another one of those Squidward gets hurt moments. Plenty of in the main series. So when Squidward confronts them, they pretend to be having tea, using the British accent again. When I reference the British accent, you guys probably should just watch the show and you get what I mean when I talk about the British accent. But yeah. So anyways, once Squidward goes away, they continue, and then finally SpongeBob successfully tags Patrick, who has climbed up all the way to the ceiling. So of course, they're still causing a ruckus, so Squidward bursts out of his room again, but because Patrick is up on the ceiling, he says hi before dropping down directly on Squidward. And another moment of sadness for Squidward here. He loses his single strand of hair because Patrick plucks it off. I mean, Patrick, why do you gotta do that? Yeah, so they get kicked out and they go to different cabins, including Larry's one, where because Sandy points out that the brain is not a muscle but rather an organ, in Patrick's mind, Patrick's like playing the organ in a very silly manner. It was pretty funny, but I guess it's the pun Right, like organ as in like a body organ and the musical organ. But because they introduced tag to that cabin, it kind of creates a lot of trouble. They sneak out, and then a song starts playing. I actually really like the song, and I'm not sure what it's called. I couldn't find it in the credits for this episode for some reason, so maybe it doesn't have a name, but I'll just call it the tag song. So they go from cabin to cabin, like this, the rich people cabin here, where SpongeBob gets kicked out using a golf club. Then they go over to Bubble Bass's cabin, where they play a board game of tag. But then Patrick tries to fool around, but his plans are foiled, right? And then finally they go to Mrs. Puff's lighthouse. They get to dry up, but unfortunately, Sandy starts to chain off using the towel to smack the other person in the butt, and this results in SpongeBob whacking Mrs. Puff with his towel, causing Mrs. Puff to inflate, and yeah, that's not great. So Mr. Krabs eventually gets them to help look after Pearl, baby Pearl, while he gets some rest in his quarters. And the game of tag continues here. Patrick whips up this toilet roll as if it were a scroll and says that the another word for hit in English, in Old English, is tag, right? So he continues the game, and baby Pearl actually gets involved in the game as well. In fact, she seems to be a pretty good player of tag. So we have all these scenes where like the gang are playing tag with Pearl, and eventually the game ends because Pearl is on Mr. Krabs, who is sleeping, right? So they don't want to wake him, but they still have to tag her all at once. But they kind of fail, and then they get caught, right? They wake up Mr. Krabs, and Mr. Krabs brings them back to the dingy cabin and instructs Counselor Squidward to play tag with them. Squidward is actually pretty elated because he's always wanted to play tag with them, but unfortunately that happy moment is cut short because the rain stopped, and the three of them head out to go swimming. And unfortunately, Mr. Krabs says that Squidward is tagged forever. This results in Squidward being going nuts and just tags Mr. Krabs forever and runs out, causing Mr. Krabs to chase after Squidward. So it's a very lighthearted, fun moment, very silly. And this episode in general, it's a very simple concept, right? A game of tag, but they managed to add in so many different components. In fact, a lot of very silly components as well, particularly with Patrick. So I really like that, and that is why. Oh, and of course we have that song, right? I really like the tune of the song. Lyrics are pretty cool, and overall I give this episode a 8.5 out of 10. So overall episode 2 is pretty decent. You average it out between 7 to 8 points. And yeah, what are your thoughts of Sugar Squeeze and Tag You're It? Comment in the box below. I'd love to hear your opinions, and you guys can start a discussion in comments. Make sure to subscribe, like, favorite, comments that are keep right here on Ultimate SpongeBob 101. Tomorrow we'll be covering episode 3 of Kamp Koral, so make sure to come around for that as well. See you guys later. Bye.